just going to reorientate ourselves to the love letter that it is. I love the way the Bible is written in such a clever way. It's one of the most wonderful literal masterpieces of the universe. When we look through from the beginning, right in the very beginning, the relationship starts and it goes all the way from Genesis to Revelation. And in there's a framework that we're going to focus on today. And it also goes all the way from the beginning and all the way to Revelation. And that's the framework of the bride and the bridegroom. Now, who doesn't like a bride? I'm sure even the little girls like a bride. And we all have a good concept of the amount of work that goes into preparing a wedding. So we're just going to unpack this concept a little bit. You can take the photo off if you like. And we're going to think about some of the details in there that we often gloss over because we just get the big picture and the concept and we move on. And we're always moving on. So today we're going to unpack some of the details that we miss and see what gold God has hidden in there for us. And just before we get right into that, I just forgot to say earlier, so before we can talk about the children, we have to check in to see if you are okay. And so the first port of call is that. The first relationship that was formed was the one between God and us, his people. And so anyone that doesn't have a living faith here, I just want you to know that we are speaking in the Christian context, and you can ask anyone else if there's anything you don't understand. But I will be talking about that because we own God as our God, and that is the orientation we'll be coming at it from. And then the next relationship is the one with our partner or our spouse or our husband. And so we have to check in to see how we are and are we okay in those regards. And so we'll be moving in to the rest of the family as we go through the day. Bruce is just going to share some of his enlightenment on a particular area to do with relationships. I don't know if that's higher.
That's all right. Well, you might be surprised what I'm going to talk about, and that is the Ten Commandments. And you'll probably go, ooh, this might be interesting. Is he going to tell us to, thou shalt not, do this with, your child or your spouse or whomever? But you know what? Ten Commandments are unbelievably, what would you say? Misinterpreted in many respects. And you know what? It took Jesus to come to the earth and then tell everyone in the New Testament, this is the Ten Commandments. And he gave 2 commandments which related back to the 10. And the first one up there, it says, I'll just turn around. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus replied, love your God with all your heart, all your soul, with all your mind. And this is the first and greatest commandment. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's wonderful. And the second is it says, love your neighbour as yourself. So if we just go to the next, if we go to the Ten Commandments, we've often said, the first part's about God, and then there's the Sabbath, there's the 4th commandment, then it's about relationship with people. But let's just overlay those 10 commandments with these 2 verses. And what we get is on the next slide. Oh, you should see what I'm trying to read up there. It's like, I need binoculars, You shall have no other gods before me. Now let's remember that first. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul and all your mind. Okay? The first commandment is love me with all your heart. Okay? The second commandment is about not to make an idols of other things. And that's loving God with all your mind. And I've put on the column there, idolatry limits him in our mind. And then the third commandment is about loving God with your soul. And that's the breath, the things that come out of through our breath and our whole being, which is the whole body. And you can see there that we never disrespect him with action or word. And the third commandment is, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So Jesus, when he said, love God with all your heart, your mind and your soul, he was referring to the first three commandments. So what's the fourth commandment saying? It's about time. It's about time with a loving God who jealously wants a relationship with you. That's the essence of that fourth commandment. And you see in that fourth commandment, he set aside some time, but he just doesn't want one day. He wants your whole time, endlessly with you. Praying without ceasing is just being in a relationship with him. When you give your heart, mind and your soul to God, you naturally want to have that time with him. The Spirit enters you, and the Spirit has the fruit of the Spirit is the next 6 commandments. And what are those 6 commandments? It says, I will honour my parents, I won't murder, I won't commit adultery. It's not us, it's the Spirit in us that's not doing that. And then we start to relate to other people. And those last 6 are about us relating to other people so that we, as a vector for God to be in our hearts, he shows them what God's like. And that's what God is like. He doesn't commit murder. He doesn't commit all these other things. And people will see that reflected in our lives.
I wanted him to stay up, but he didn't want to. So just getting back to the framework, now that we've unpacked a little bit more about a new way of looking at the 10 Commandments, I just wanted to go back to some of the things in the Old Testament where we get this concept of the bride and the bridegroom introduced to us in the beginning. And it's actually good to talk about this because you've got a soon-to-be bride and bridegroom among you, Jared and Karina, and I'm sure there's others, because relationships are a moving, fluid thing, aren't we? We go from adolescence all the way to adolescence, then into relationships in different ways. And there's a lot of young couples here, so that's great. So the bride and the bridegroom are not just words and they're not just structure. They're a deeply meaning concept that we understand. And this is the wonderful thing about this. It doesn't matter what your cultural background, it doesn't matter what your age, it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic factors are. Whatever the situation, you will have an understanding of this concept of the bride and the bridegroom. So the first thing when I think of a bride and a wedding that leaps to my mind is preparation. We all have an understanding of the amount of preparation that goes in to preparing for a wedding. It doesn't matter if you're in a different culture. Obviously, some of the other cultures have a lot more elaborate methods and days of things that they do in their system than we have. But we all understand that there's preparation involved. When we think about the Bible day and the wedding, we can think about the amount of purification and washing and preparing that went on for the bride, because we understand in their cultural context this was the act that they did, and they did a lot of ceremonial things to prepare the bride. So we manage over time, from when we get the Word of God all the way through the generations to now, to still have a clear definition and understanding of what that means. I believe that in this concept, God knew the depth of feeling that it would evoke within us, wherever we were, whoever we were, and in whatever country we were in. And so I don't think, obviously it's no accident that this is what He's chosen to use as the framework from the beginning to the end. In Isaiah 61, verse 10, it says, "I will rejoice greatly in the Lord, my soul, and I will exult in my God, for He has clothed me with garments of salvation, and He has wrapped me with a robe of righteousness. As a bridegroom decks himself with a garland, and a bride adorns herself with jewels." Straight away, there's no holding back. It's a luscious, exaggerated definition of what He's done. He's mentioned things that we understand: jewels, adornment, lavish things. He's not just talking about, it doesn't matter how conservative you are, He's not just talking about grey, white, He's talking about exciting, lavish love. He wraps us with these garments. It's such a beautiful concept, and from infancy we can understand as well this concept of wrapping, the security that comes with a wrapping, the warmth, the comfort, the reassurance, the knowledge that you're safe and loved. The words here are so beautiful. It continues on, and later on in Jeremiah we hear that the bridesmaids tell of His salvation. So the whole wedding party is involved. This is an amazing, amazing metaphor. The bridesmaids tell, and while the groom's love floods the whole party, it is so obvious that he's really gushing over his bride. He is really excited, and he has something to share because he's in love. He's absolutely besotted with his bride. As it was in the beginning, today we are the bride. It gives you goosebumps to think that we are the bride, because we understand what it means. It's not just an everyday occurrence. It's a very important thing that has a lot of significance. I've always wondered from a young age why He talked about us as the bride. I always found it curious. And as I grew up, I always thought, even though I didn't understand it necessarily, I always thought there's something, really big about this. I always knew that there was something big about it, and it meant something. We are the bride, and there is a wedding taking place. This thread, this golden thread, is running all the way through Scripture. This love letter, the story of the saving grace of God, saving a threatened relationship with whatever it takes. In order for us to move forward, it's important that we look back. And I'm sure at whatever age you are, to some extent you've already figured that out. It's unfortunate sometimes that you have to look at something that you've already moved through. And there are people we all know that never look back. I can say this because my mum's not here and she won't mind, but she's one of those people. She never looks back. She's like a bull at a gate, and she's got her eye on something, whichever it is, and if you're in her way, watch out. She's just always moving forward. There's something she loses for that. Because when we look back, we not only see the story that transforms us because we understand from the beginning of history what happened, but also in our own walk, we get to have a look at what went before. And a little bit later on this afternoon, we're going to unpack a bit about your backstory. Because unfortunately, we mere mortals, if we're interested in the front story, the day-to-day story that we're setting day by day, and the future story, we have to have a look at the backstory. Because unfortunately, the backstory will determine your front story if you don't know what's going on in it. So we will look at that a little bit more in detail later. But that's why I want to ask, are you okay? And I want to check, like a medical check. This love letter has a lot to offer. But sometimes it's not the thing that it's meant to be for us. With the term bride, there's a lot I've already said about being prepared, but it means getting busy. It's an intimate personal expression from the Bible times. As I said, it involves a lot of preparation. And just like today, we are the bride and there is a wedding to prepare for, and we need to be getting prepared and ready. The way we're going to unpack it this morning, we're going to look at two particular stories from Jesus' life. And the very first one, which you won't be surprised, and that's why I love this thing, it's a literary marvel. Any English scholars just, if they unpack the details, it's so amazing. The very first miracle Jesus performed was where? Where was it? At a wedding. Now that's a coincidence. No. Everywhere you look, this book just proves itself over and over. So it's no coincidence Jesus, not just any miracle, but his first miracle. Anything that's a first thing in your life is a milestone. It's something that you're going to notice forever. When you look back, you'll remember that's my first love. That was my first bike. That was my first car. That was my first house. This was Jesus' first miracle at a wedding. Clearly, the author is wanting to articulate this concept of the wedding. It is no accident. The details amongst this story also give you goosebumps because it's just amazing. So it's a wedding, the venue. The event is a significant event because it's a first thing. And God reinforces the framework that it's all about his relationship with his bride. Do we understand this, church? This story is about us. Whenever he talks about this framework, he has told us clearly that we, the church, we are the bride. So whenever you see anything about a wedding, you need to prick up your ears and your consciousness and think, wow, this has got something for me. Because we are the bride. We are the star of the wedding, the shining pinnacle. Bruce is just going to introduce a little bit more about the feast. After we have just a short break, we're just going to go now and have a quick break for those of you that are watching. Thanks.